Hello everyone, welcome to episode 23 of Conversing on Africa's Peace, a podcast focused on the African Union's Peace and Security Council and key related issues, produced by Amani Africa Media and Research Services. This is Hani Wahila from Amani Africa. I am joined here today with my colleague Praveen Habu. Hi Praveen.
Hello Hani.
Thank you for being here. I'll just give us an overview of the upcoming chairship in October. Egypt will be chairing the PSC in October. The program of work for the month was adopted in mid-September. And as we enter the early days of October, we have seen a few revisions made in the initial program of work. Essentially, whereas the initial program of work envisaged a field mission to Cairo and a daytime visit to Port Sudan during the first week of the month, the revision now has added a session on October 2nd to deliberate on the theme Peace, Security and Development Nexus in Africa, bridging the gap between policy and practice, which came as the PSC's 1234th session. With this change in place, the revised program of work in October envisages 9 substantive sessions, all of which will take place at the ambassadorial level. But as always, before we go into the details of the upcoming sessions featured this month, let's do a brief recap of what transpired during the last month. Praveen, can you please take us through what has transpired in the last month, please?
Thank you, Hani, for having me and for the overview of the month of October. But in September, Cameroon presided over the chairship of the Peace and Security Council and the chairship of Ambassador Churchill Monono. And the council initially envisaged undertaking 5 substantive sessions and 2 field missions. However, in the end, the council only held 3 substantive sessions with a total of 4 agenda items and maintained its initially 2 field visits. Changes made to the program of work also included the removal of 2 sessions, the thematic engagements on natural disaster management, and the country-specific session on South Sudan. And we also saw the addition of an agenda item on the situation in Sudan, which was held in a ministerial level in New York after the 79th UNGA. Also, the council began the month with a session on the protection of journalists in armed conflicts. This was the first time the PSC has engaged on the question of protection of journalists in armed conflict. And also during the month, we saw that the council addressed 2 new agenda items that have never been discussed. This was a session on civil-military relations, a session that has been previously put on the agenda 3 times. However, this was the first time the council was able to engage on the matter. The PSC also undertook 2 field visits, one to the Central African Republic, where the council held its annual commemoration of Amnesty Month. And the outcome of Amnesty Month resulted in 3 countries, namely the Central African Republic, Djibouti, and Rwanda, receiving support to observe Amnesty Month, enabling them to conduct activities such as public awareness campaigns that highlight the negative effects of illicit small arms and light weapons. The second visit was on Gabon, where the council engaged with the transitional government on its roadmap to returning to constitutional order. And while in Gabon, the council also engaged with the regional bloc of Central Africa, AUPSC. This was a follow-up to its commitment to establish enhanced coordination with the REX. So far, the council has had consultation with 3 of the regional blocs. The situation in Sudan also made its way to the PSC agenda after the recent escalation of armed conflict in early September between the RSF and SF in El Fasher in Darfur. This session was held at the ministerial level in New York, as I earlier mentioned, while PSC members attended the Summit of the Future and the 79th UNGA. The outcome was limited indirect action. However, the PSC did not pick up on the previous decisions, such as the first committee of 5 heads of state convening expected to take place this October, and the solidarity mission to Port Sudan, which will also take place within this month of October. While in New York City also, the council held a ministerial session on new security threats in Africa and the future of the Peace and Security Council in managing these threats.
Thank you, Praveen, for that look back to the council's engagement in September. Looking ahead, as I mentioned earlier, we're expecting 9 substantive agenda items to be considered by the council in October. The month began with a 4-day trip to Cairo and a daytime visit to Port Sudan. In Cairo, the council engaged with the Secretary General of the League of Arab States, The engagement is centered on the objective of revitalizing the engagement between the two bodies, as well as their working methods, and identifying areas of mutual interest. Praveen, if you can please take us through what else transpired in the first week of the month, that would be great.
Thank you, Hani, for that. In addition, the PSC met the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Immigration and Egyptians Abroad of the Arab Republic of Egypt, and exchanged views on regional, continental, and global peace and security developments. And on 2nd of October, while still in Cairo, the PSC held its first substantive session on the theme Peace, Security, and Development Nexus in Africa, bridging gaps between policy and practice. As we mentioned earlier, this was the 1234th session of the Council, and the PSC engaged in discussion regarding the ongoing violent conflicts and complex crises that threaten peace, security, and stability in Africa. They emphasized the necessity of intensifying efforts in PCRD, stabilization, transition, and peace building in order to prevent recurrence. And also, during the discussion, the PSC called for renewed and integrated strategies to effectively tackle emerging threats in pursuit of the AU's flagship project of silencing the guns in Africa and Agenda 2063. And moving on October 3rd, the PSC had a day visit to Port Sudan for a solidarity mission and engagement with various stakeholders on the situation in the country, including the chairman of the Transitional Sovereignty Council of Sudan, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, and also engagement with the governor of Darfur, in which they got highlights on the situation in the country, particularly in Darfur. And further, they engaged with the Attorney General and also a member of the Sovereignty Council in charge of humanitarian issues in Sudan. This was alongside engagement with the cross-section of political party and religious leaders, as well as representatives from the civil society. And this comes as the PSC prepares for the upcoming meeting of the PSC Presidential Ad Hoc Committee on Sudan, which is scheduled within the month of October to be held in Uganda.
Thanks, Praveen, for that overview of the first few sessions that took place. The upcoming sessions that were supposed to take place this week actually was a session on the chairperson's report on combating terrorism on the continent. The session was supposed to be held on October 9th. However, the session was pushed back to the third week of October. Essentially, this session is in accordance with the decision made by the Assembly during the 15th Ordinary Session in 2010, which requested the Commission to provide regular reports on the progress of counterterrorism efforts and cooperation in Africa. So the last time the PSC reviewed the AU Commission's chairperson's report in October during its 1182nd session, it decided on a few actions, and this upcoming session will be an opportunity for the PSC to assess the implementation of these decisions. These decisions include the need for the establishment of the AU Ministerial Committee on Counterterrorism, as well as the operationalization of the Counterterrorism Coordination Task Force, and the activation of the PSC Subcommittee on Counterterrorism and the Special Funds on Prevention and Combating Terrorism and Violent Extremism. So there's a few mechanisms that need to be operationalized and established. And then beyond that, the other requests from the Council was towards the Africa Center for the Study of Research and Terrorism. And they had requested the center to conduct a field research for the purpose of gathering evidence around the relationship between transnational organized crime and terrorism. So this session will provide the opportunity for the PSC to have a check-in on the progress of these decisions that they've made. Praveen, if you could take us through the following week.
Yeah, that's interesting, Hani. Thank you. Moving on, during the third week of the month, from 14th to 19th, it is expected that the Peace and Security Council and the UN Security Council will meet for their 9th informal consultations, and the 18th AU Peace and Security Council, UN Security Council consultative meeting. There will be also consultations between the PSC and African members of the UN Security Council, and also the 7th joint consultative meeting between the PSC and the UN Peace Building Commission. During that period also, while in New York, the PSC will have a public lecture on the theme of peace and security in Africa at Yale University, in which the discussion will involve all PSC member states and thereafter a roundtable discussion. Moreover, it is expected that during the 9th informal joint seminar, several topics of discussions are expected to be considered. This including implementation of the Security Council Resolution 2719, which was adopted in 2023, and peace support operations in Africa. Also, another theme will be youth, women, peace and security, and children affected by armed conflicts, and also the adverse effects of climate change on the stability and development in Africa. And finally, operationalization of the joint working methods between the Peace and Security Council and the UN Security Council. And for the last engagement, which is the 18th annual joint consultative meeting, discussions are expected to focus on the situation in Sudan, also the situation in Somalia and post-ATMIS security arrangements, and the situation in the Sahel region and the Lake Chad Basin region, including countering the threat of terrorism. And finally, the Great Lakes region, especially the Eastern DRC and the Central African Republic. Thank you, Annie.
Thanks, Praveen. Looks like that's a tight agenda for the PSC and the UN Security Council for their consultations, huh?
Correct.
Yeah, so following the joint consultations with the UN Security Council, the Council will be back on the 22nd of October and will engage in a meeting with the PRC, Subcommittee on Budget, on Financing, Peace Support Operations, and PSC's activities. The session will address the budget for all of the peace and security elements and mechanisms of the AU, so looking into PAPS, the PSC in general, Peace Fund, and Peace Support Operations as well. These engagements aim to ensure that there's more synergy between the finance and the peace and security initiatives undertaken by the AU, and hopefully the aspiration for this convening is to be institutionalized and occur on an annual basis. Following the PSC's session with the PRC on the 25th, the PSC is expected to have a session to get an update on the situation in Somalia with regards to post-ATMIS security arrangements, and the session is identified as specifically focusing on preservation of state institution. But beyond that, this session builds on an informal consultation that was held yesterday, actually, on the 7th of October, where the PSC convened an informal consultations to address mobilizing resources on financing of the new mission. And the new mission was endorsed by the PSC in the last meeting that they had. So in addition to the informal consultations, there are important developments shaping the discussions. This includes the UN Security Council meeting, which is set for October 11th, and then the Secretary General's meeting with the AU Commission Chair on October 21st. So essentially the Secretary General will produce a report on ATMIS and Somalia based on its consultation with the AU Commission Chair and submit it to the UN Security Council for November 15th. So these are a few developments in and around October that will shape the discussions that will take place on the 25th. Praveen, if you could just give us an overview of what will happen during the last week of the month.
Yeah, thank you, Hani. Well, during the last week of the month, Council is expected to have 3 consecutive sessions on various thematical issues. And the first session will see the Council get a briefing on ICRC on the humanitarian situation in Africa. And this will be followed by a session on women, peace and security. And as customary, the Peace and Security Council holds a session on women, peace and security biannually. So actually, the last engagement the PSC held on women, peace and security was during its ministerial high-level seminar on women, peace and security, where Council agreed to a set of processes to be undertaken around women's representation and participation in the peace process.
Okay.
And this session will be also an opportunity to follow up on the commitments made during the ministerial session. And lastly, Hani, on 31st of October, Council will convene a session on climate, peace and security, where it may address the consultations undertaken by the AU Commission on the Common Africa Position, which took place in August of this year in Nairobi. And during the consultations, participants worked on improving the draft Common Africa Position on climate change, peace and security by providing key recommendations for its enhancement, and developed a revised draft which was intended for submission for the PSC to consider and potential adoption. Thank you, Hani.
Thank you, Praveen. So this brings us to the end of another episode. We wish Egypt a very fruitful month as it takes the chairship for October 2024. And we wish everyone taking part in the work of the PSC productive discussions on the important topics outlined briefly here today. We are happy to encourage our listeners to dig deeper into the PSC's agenda as well as the analytical work that we produce. Before we go, and as usual, we'd like to wish the following African states happy National Days of celebration in October. On October 1st, we have Nigeria celebrating its Independence Day. On the 2nd of October, it's the Independence Day for Guinea. October 4th, Independence Day in Lesotho. October 9th, Independence Day in Uganda. October 12th, Independence Day in Equatorial Guinea. October 23rd, Liberation Day in Libya. And lastly, October 24th, Independence Day in Zambia. Let me also thank our listeners for joining us for this month's edition on Conversing on Africa's Peace podcast. We hope you have a great month and a productive year. We'll be back next month to consider the PSC's agenda for November 2024. Until then, goodbye. We wish you all peace and prosperity.